Okay, so what we're looking at here is the colony of Jamestown, which will be England's first really successful colony in the New World. And a couple things here on the presentation that you're going to be looking at. So first off is James I becomes King of England. James I will be kind of the funding, or actually give kind of the go-ahead to settle at Jamestown. But what you have here is the creation of joint stock companies. And these joint stock companies, which I think we've talked about in class, are going to be really important because it shares the risk of settling. So that way, if one of you decided, well, I'm going to fund the whole expedition myself, and the expedition goes bad, well, you've lost all of your savings. But if 10 of you pool money together to try and find a colony overseas, then that way you guys have kind of shared the risk of potentially losing money on it. So what you end up getting here is the joint stock company, the Virginia Company, was only supposed to last for a couple years. And the hope was the members of this Virginia Company who had gotten permission from King James, received what's called a charter from him. They thought, well, we make it rich very quickly, and then we liquidate the company for profit at that point. So there really wasn't a long-term process here of colonization. They were more interested in, setting up a colony, making quick profit, and that would be it. They weren't terribly concerned about, having thousands of colonists live there long-term. But what's important here is that they had a charter. And a charter is significant because what this meant was that the people who settled overseas, so who came over to live in Jamestown, technically had the same rights of Englishmen that those people had back home in England. And of course what this meant was that colonists in the Americas felt confident that they had traditional English rights. And of course, when those rights are going to be violated, it will make them very frustrated. So you can kind of see foreshadowing how this is going to come into play later when we get to the Revolution. Regardless, on May 24th, 1607, the Virginia Company sends 3 ships, and they land in the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And in the mouth of the Chesapeake is a site they picked. It was easy to defend, but it was swampy, so there was lots of mosquitoes. So in terms of health-wise, a pretty bad spot. Defendability, pretty good spot. The other thing is that while they're there, the colony is going to come very close to being destroyed. They're going to suffer from disease, malnutrition, starvation. There's lots of game in the woods. There's lots of fish in the Chesapeake. The problem is that the people who came over to the Jamestown colony, they were not they were not the John Smith type adventurers. They were quote unquote gentlemen. These were people who were more concerned about business and profit than they understood about being able to hunt and provide food for themselves. John Smith will be instrumental for them to survive because under Smith, basically, if you didn't work, you didn't eat, and obviously if you didn't eat, you died. And so John Smith implemented very harsh punishments for people who weren't willing to work on the colony. And of course, we kind of know the story about Smith and Pocahontas, and we'll kind of talk about that. So there you can see kind of the early Virginia and Maryland colonies. And there is a rendering of Pocahontas. That's actually an illustration of her when she was received in England. You can see kind of decked out in English attire. Unfortunately for her, when they were preparing for the return back to Virginia, she became ill and died, but her infant son, along with John Rolfe, returned. And Woodrow Wilson's wife is supposedly actually a descendant of Pocahontas. Okay, of course the colonists are not alone. There are natives already in the Chesapeake region. They're led by a chieftain named Powhatan, and Powhatan, which is technically the father of Pocahontas, he had several Indian tribes that kind of worked in the Chesapeake area, and for the most part, Pocahontas is going to act as like a power broker between Powhatan and Smith and the English settlers. But things are going to change. In 1610, there is going to be a new governor installed, a guy named Lord De La Warr, and he is going to pretty much impose a harsh military regime on the colony, and he begins launching these military offensives against the Indians in the Chesapeake. And basically what they're going to do is anger the natives because they're going on the offensive, which will lead to the First Anglo-Powhatan War. And this war is going to only end when Pocahontas marries John Rolfe, which will kind of be like, back in like the medieval times when you would marry off like a daughter to someone from an opposing kingdom to kind of seal a peace deal. What's important about this, though, is that, first off, it's the first interracial union in Virginia between Pocahontas and John Rolfe. But at the same time, this is going to also spell the beginning of bad relationships between the natives in Virginia and the Chesapeake Indians. It's also going to be interesting because De La Warr, who had fought against the Irish, is going to use these quote-unquote Irish tactics that he had used there. These very harsh tactics where you would burn people out of their homes, you'd kill women and children. And so you can see already the English are off to a fairly bad start in terms of their relationship with the Native Americans.